get this demon out of here, please? Jeez, that cat's crazy. Hello, creeps! Andy here, and today I want to talk about more horror movies that you did not know were books. So I've done 2 of these videos before. I did one with horror movies you didn't know were horror novels, and then I did one horror novels that you didn't know were, no, horror books that you didn't know were novellas. I'll put a list down below of other ones that you can watch before or after this video, if you are so inclined. But today I want to talk about a few more horror movies that you may not know came from books. So let's get started. We're only going to talk about 3 today because I talk a lot. So the first book we're going to talk about today is Psycho. So this is a 1958 book. It was written by Robert Bloch. He is a prominent horror writer. He wrote a lot for the movies when he was alive. Just a prominent figure in horror for sure. This is probably his most famous work of art, although he has worked on a lot of other older films as well. But this is Psycho. We all know what Psycho, well, hopefully we should all know what Psycho is. If you haven't seen it, go watch it right now. Anyway, okay, so basically the film and the movie are pretty similar. There's a woman who steals a bunch of money from her work to try to pay off the debts of her fiance. She takes the money, she goes on the run, she stops at a hotel who happens to be run by Norman Bates, and she is murdered in the process by his mother. They are pretty similar in that sense. I mean, the movie does follow the plot of the book pretty religiously. But there are a few variations, so let's get into the variations. So similarities, plot, same characters, same general ideas, most of the same things happen. They really did a great job of referring to the book for this movie. Even things like Norman being a taxidermist in the book are shown in the movie. Maybe not outwardly stated, but you can see a lot of taxidermy on the wall, and it's definitely referred to. So I think they did such a good job of really following Bloch's book. A huge difference, probably the biggest difference, is that Norman Bates, he's described much differently in the novel than he is in the film. So he is described as a middle-aged man, he is overweight, and he actually wears glasses. He has no confidence in the book, he's very nervous, he turns red a lot, he gets embarrassed a lot, and it's that lack of confidence that gives the main girl who steals the money, Mary, confidence in herself. Throughout the movie, she's a horrible convict. Like, every single person who comes across her knows she's doing something illegal. Like, she's the worst liar. She's terrible at everything. She definitely responds to Norman in a way. In the movie, he's very tall, thin, handsome. I think this choice was made for obvious reasons. Filming the movie, you know, Norman obviously had to be able to dress up as a woman and be shown as a woman, and I think that using a middle-aged overweight man, it would have been more difficult for the audience to truly believe that. Instead, they used somebody who has a very slim figure, and it was easy to kind of pull those scenes off. So I think that's really the only reason why that was changed. And also, Anthony Perkins is just a genius in this film. Another difference is the beginning. So the beginning of the novel starts with Norman Bates reading a lot of books about psychology, books about really brutal acts of violence. He's very into literature, and in fact he kind of self-diagnoses himself. Jeez. He diagnoses himself with schizophrenia about halfway through the book. That's also another difference, is that you kind of learn everything halfway through the novel. It's not a surprise like it is in the movie. At the end of the movie is kind of when everything comes together and you're like, oh wow. But throughout the second half of the book, the writer is pretty much telling you like, hey, this is what's going on. There's mention of Lady Macbeth in here. So that's interesting because Lady Macbeth is obviously in Shakespeare's play Macbeth. She's a very ruthless person where she just wants her husband to go and murder all these people for her own advantage. But at the end of the novel, she does a complete 180 and goes crazy and ends up committing suicide because she feels so guilty. So it's interesting that he kind of compares himself to Lady Macbeth. For me, that's him admitting that he does have some sort of conscience and does feel guilty for the crimes that his mother is committing. There's also a mention of Hamlet's father. So it says, there was the ghost of Hamlet's father, for example. This is the only line that talks about Hamlet's father, but in Shakespeare's play Hamlet, Hamlet is met by his father, which is the ghost of his father because his father was murdered. I think this is only put in here to just kind of let you know that his mom can be equated to Hamlet's father, if that makes sense. That's the only reference that makes sense to me. Oh, one thing that I want to talk about for sure, the shower scene, right? So the shower scene is like one of the most infamous scenes in film history in relation to horror. However, in the book, it is on page 41 and it is a singular paragraph. I just wanted to read it to you because I do. So this is when Mary's in the shower. Then she did see it there, just a face, peering through the curtains, hanging in mid-air like a mask. A headscarf concealed the hair and the glossy eyes stared inhumanely, but it wasn't a mask. It couldn't be. The skin had been powdered dead white and 2 hectic spots of rouge centered on the cheekbones. It wasn't a mask. It was the face of a crazy old woman. Mary started to scream, and then the curtains parted further and a hand appeared, holding a butcher's knife. It was the knife that, a moment later, cut off her scream and her head. What an awesome line! Oh, Robert Bloch, you were a genius, sir. I just love that. I love that so much. That might be my favorite line in the whole book. And then also, I just like to showcase just the writer's ability. So let me read you another line that I think is just so beautiful. He pressed a switch and the bedroom light blossomed and sent forth yellow petals of light. Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. I love books so much. Like, you can't get things like that from a movie watching it. It's so fantastic. I just love it so much. Oh, one other thing. The quote in the book, it says, "I think perhaps all of us go a little crazy at times." Where in the movie, of course, it says, "We all go a little mad sometimes." Anthony Perkins, Psycho. Did I just get meta on you and quote Psycho through Scream? Whoa. I did. But other than that, pretty much the same. Interesting to see Norman Bates from kind of a different perspective. Psycho is obviously just such an iconic horror film, so if you haven't read it in book form and you love novels, I suggest picking it up. It's interesting, it's cool, a lot like the movie, but still some differences, so worth reading for sure. Okay, next up we are actually going to be talking about a Japanese writer and a Japanese horror film. So this is Audition, and I apologize for saying all of these names incorrectly because I'm an idiot, but this is by Ryu Murakami, and it is by the film the same name, Audition. So this was written in 1997, the film was made in 99, I believe, yes, 99. The film is actually by Takashi Miike, I think is how you pronounce his name, and he has done a ton of Japanese horror. If you have seen any of his movies, he did One Missed Call, the Japanese version. He did Ichi the Killer, Gozu, I mean a million films. Those are just the ones that I've seen. All very messed up. A lot of people like to refer to Ichi the Killer as torture porn, so that'll give you a sense of what's coming up. The book is actually very, very mild. They're both pretty much the same in like the general sense of the novel, so in the general sense of the plot. We follow a man who has lost his wife, he's raising a son, and a few years later he decides that he would like to remarry again. And he's in the film industry, so he decides to him and his friend decide to hold an audition for a part in the film, but it's really just a ruse for him to audition a bunch of women to see who he would want to be married to. What's interesting about this one is that he falls in love with this girl kind of instantly. I mean, he reads her essay that she sent in with the audition, and he's just drawn to her immediately and kind of doesn't care about anybody else but this girl. So what's interesting is that we only hear about her through his perspective in the novel. We don't get much of a description other than, you know, his, like, what am I trying to say? Like his perception that is skewed by love or lust. So we don't really get much information about her other than she's beautiful and intriguing, and that's about it. However, we do get other people's interpretations of her through interactions with him, and everyone else seems to think that she's off. They see something weird about her, they don't quite trust her, they something's weird there, and he just doesn't see it. So we kind of have to take his word for it along the way, but we're also very skeptical because of what the other people have said. This book is 189 pages, and it doesn't start getting into the horror until about page 170. So most of this book is just super mild, following him around. He's kind of courting this girl that he likes, taking her to these fancy dinners, trying to figure out what's going on. It's more mysterious than a horror novel, for sure. And then the horror ramps up. So if you don't know what Audition is, it's about this girl who kind of like takes vengeance on the men who she feels have mistreated her by torturing them with wire that cuts through bone. Oh, another thing. So the only real description we get of her are very small pieces, like, oh, she's wearing jeans and tennis shoes, right? So it adds to like the normality of her. So we just feel like she's a normal girl. We don't really get any weirdness from her until the very end. The movie, however, is quite different, very different. It is on Shudder if you'd like to see it. Again, it is a Japanese horror film, so it is in subtitles, but I will say they're very easy to follow because there's not huge amounts of dialogue, so it's really easy to keep up with the subtitles and you don't get lost or anything. The audition scene in the film is very comical. That's a bit of a difference too, and just like a really fun part of the book, of the movie, sorry. Here's the thing, it's about the same up until our lead man loses consciousness. At that point, we get a very weird array of images and scenes. We get some flashbacks, we get some things that haven't happened but are weird and creepy and disgusting and gross, and I think this serves for a few purposes. One, obviously to add more horror to the film, because if Takashi didn't take it in his hands to make it more of a horror film, if he just followed the book verbatim, it really wouldn't be much of a horror movie. It would definitely be more of like a mystery. He makes it horror. Adding like gross things here and there, first of all, is just kind of like his MO. And second, it adds to the creepiness of the film. I think it also serves a purpose for the audience as well, because there are a lot of subtle things that may have not been picked up by the audience if you weren't paying close enough attention. So I think that scene also serves for like, hey, in case you missed it, this is what's going on. And she's actually a really crazy bitch. We definitely see more of her. She's just a stage 5 clinger from the get-go. We see her like waiting anxiously by the phone. We see her holding people hostage. We see a lot more in the film than we ever get a glimpse of in the novel. The ending's pretty much the same. It's a little different, but as far as like her thinking that the main guy has done her wrong and wants to avenge herself, that's similar. Oh, I wanted to read a quote, because I thought this was cool. So this is when she kind of begins her torturing of the main character. The balloon of fear was pushing with ever greater pressure against his temples, and when she touched his legs, the balloon burst and the nightmare bled into reality. I don't know, I just love sharing with you guys like the most magical pieces of literature within these books. I love that line so much. So if you have not seen Audition, you guys have got to watch it. It's weird, it's creepy, it's gory, like it's got it all, really. I do like Takashi Miike, if I'm pronouncing that right. I do like his work. Check out Ichi the Killer 2, that's also on Netflix. Or no, I lied. That's also on Shudder. And maybe I'll do a video on that later, I don't know. I haven't seen that one in a while, but that was one of my favorite horror films when I was in high school. So yeah, interesting. I didn't know that this was a novel, and I was really stoked to read it. Very different perspective than the film, but I'm glad that I read it. It's always cool to see where things started. And let's move on to the last one. This is Richard Matheson's A Spur of Echoes. This was written in 1958. And it was filmed, and the film was released in 1999, so a big gap. These other two were just a few years apart. This one, many years, obviously. And I think that leads to some of the things that we're going to talk about. So this one, very different. The characters are different, the location's different, the general plot line is the same. A man gets hypnotized by, well, in one version, his wife's sister-in-law, in one version, his wife's brother-in-law, which opens up something in his mind that makes him more susceptible to those around him. In the novel, it's much more of kind of like a psychological thing. He focuses more on you know, what it means for him to be more aware of his surroundings. He really soaks in like the emotions and the feelings of other people. So what's cool about that in the book is that we have the first person perspective of one man. However, it feels kind of like an omnipotent narrator because we really do get to feel and see other people's feelings and emotions as if we did have an omnipotent narrator. Through the openness of his mind, in the novel, we get to see him trying to figure out, well, I guess in both, he has a vision of a woman, and so he's trying to figure out who that woman is. In the novel, he thinks it's more of like an imprint in time, so a woman that has lived in the house before him, and he's just kind of like seeing energy, residual energy that she has left behind. In the movie, however, it is much more of a ghost story. So I guess that general plot is the same, where a man gets hypnotized, he sees a woman, and he's trying to figure out why he sees a woman. However, I mean, there are so many differences. Like I said, the characters, the locations, the book, they're in California, the movie, they're in Boston, Chicago? I don't know anything. In the movie, it's his sister-in-law. In the book, it's his brother-in-law, and the sister-in-law adds a lot of comic value to the movie as well, so that I really loved. By the way, I love this film. I think it's one of the best, it's in 1999, but it's one of the best horror 90s films for sure, in my opinion. They took the book, fixed the errors with it, I'll get to that, and then just made it more relatable to a modern 90s audience. But I did want to read you a few cool quotes. So like I said, he could feel things. So let me read you this one. So this was when his son was crying. So he said, I feel his fear. No, I felt his fear. I felt his fear. I felt it as distinctly as if it were a current of icy water trickling from his brain to mine. Like, just really awesome. The son is used a lot more. He's much more prominent in the film, and he's much more necessary to the film. In the film, the man is seeing this woman, and he kind of knows something's wrong. He thinks she's a ghost. His son gives evidence that she's a ghost. He sees her too. There's a scene actually in the movie where the mom is going to take a bath and the ghost is sitting on the edge of the bath, like fucking with the water in the bathtub, and the woman like gets in the tub with the ghost. And that is how I picture myself if ghosts really do exist, just so unaware of my surroundings and unaware of ghosts in my bathtub with me. I always just think that that's like a perfect example of us people who don't see or feel or hear anything because we're just so oblivious if ghosts really do exist. So I do love that scene, but I guess what I'm trying to say is the pieces just fit more cohesively together in the film. So for example, in the book, they go out to dinner and they leave their son with a babysitter. Halfway through dinner, he gets a weird feeling, they go home, they find out that the babysitter is trying to steal their son. And it's like, it didn't make any sense to the book. I mean, maybe it did because it's a book in the 50s and maybe it made more sense for that time, but like in the 90s, they knew where she lived, they knew her name, they knew her family, they knew her house, like she lived in the same town as them. It just felt so weird for that to be in there. And in the movie, they took that and they made sense of it by pushing the plot forward. So it was things like that that like, I think just for a 90s audience, it wouldn't have made perfect sense. Maybe it made more sense in the 50s. I don't know, I wasn't alive in the 50s. But things like that just seemed odd. Here's the thing. After reading the book, I was kind of disappointed, and then I felt bad for being disappointed because I know Richard Matheson is such a prolific writer. Like, he wrote for the Twilight Zones. He wrote more episodes than anyone except Rod Serling. And this is a quote from some website, I can't remember which one. It said that many of those episodes became the series' most acclaimed and most frequently aired. He wrote tons of books that you guys have heard of. I'm not going to name them because I might do a video on them later. And he's an amazing writer. It's not that the book was written poorly. It's just that the movie did such a good job of bringing the idea, one, to a more creepy place, and two, to a more modern audience, that it was just weird going back to this and seeing such a big difference. And like, going from a ghost story to reading this and being like, oh, this isn't even really about a ghost story. So I really felt bad that I didn't love the book as much as I think I could have had I not seen the movie before I did. And I'm definitely excited to check out some of his other works. Oh, and then here's a perfect example. Here's a quote on the front of the book cover. The author who influenced me the most as a writer was Richard Matheson. Guess who wrote that? Stephen King. So obviously he's an amazing writer. So yeah, I just felt a little guilty for not loving the book as much as I think I could have had I not been so in love with this film. I also wrote, like The Shining kind of / Sixth Sense both. Whatever that means. I also wrote fire poker homage to book ? But I don't remember a fire poker in the novel, so can't help you there. Oh gosh, I'm the worst at this. I think you're a little tilted. It's you, not me. The endings are vastly different. I'm curious if you guys have read this and watched the movie, how you feel about this book, and should I be as disappointed in myself? Oh my god, I'm disappointed in myself. I didn't know I felt that way. Excited to read more Richard Matheson, and this is absolutely not, please don't take this as me like talking bad about this writer. He's an amazing writer. It's just, you know, when you just fall in love with a story one way and then you get it in a different medium, it can be jarring, you know? Okay, so those were the 3 books today. Which of these movies have you seen? Which one's your favorite? And have you read any of these books? Yeah, that's it for today. If you want more horror, please feel free to subscribe. Did I just say fee? Please feel free to subscribe. You can also listen to a few of my horror stories by clicking the link below. Other than that, I will see you in a few days with some more horror. Bye, guys.